Hey, Ramblers, before we kick off today's episode, thank you for even taking the time to listen to the podcast. We appreciate it. If you love the podcast, toss your 2 cents in using the hashtag Let's Ramble and make sure you hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all the latest content and updates. Visit us at our new website at offsource.tech and make sure to follow us across all social platforms at Assistance HQ. Now let's ramble. And now, a moment from our sponsor. What's up, Ramblers? Welcome back to another episode of The Ramblings. I'm your host, Angelo Roberts.
And this is your host, Benjamin.
And we are back with another wonderful podcast episode. And today we are touching on some feedback, if you will. We've had some listener feedback from the podcast, and we just want to touch on a couple of points. Today, it's nothing super long. We're actually, due to Gary Vee's working on a couple of shorter length things, because of COVID, we're working on a couple of short length podcasts as well. So this isn't something that's going to be ridiculously long, like we have multiple parts, how where me and Ben normally go. However, it's been brought to my attention that certain beliefs and core values that I think in some of the podcasts that we've displayed have been misconstrued. And so I just want to take a small moment where we're going to talk about not only how being a first generational wealth person can affect you and your children, but also just taking a moment in time to clarify up some of the misconceptions about some of the things I'm thinking. One of the very first things I want to bring to attention is I guess one of the biggest ones, where we were talking about how we treat our employees. And it came off of when we were talking about pay. It sounded very Scrooge, and I am not a Scrooge. And I want to emphasize that my real core point in that is that I am for not as much base pay, but a much larger incentive, because I am a person of you earn. What you earn is what you get. And so your base pay will only be but so much, whereas your incentives will be larger and you'll have the ability to earn more, because I believe in paying for results. And so in the best way for being able to do that is providing large incentives for people that do the work. I am a person of trade-off, if you will. If I have a large enough base salary, I don't care about extra work. I don't need to do extra work. However, in a company, extra work has to be done, and so tasks have to be done. And so in order to incentivize going above and beyond and going the extra mile, I incentivize that with money. And in order to keep that incentive at a high enough rate, in order to keep the benefits at a high enough rate, in order to implement certain gift strategies, hey, if we were going to do giving them $100 stipulation on funds for work items in their particular household, if we gave them this particular stipulation, all of those come from the business, and so my particular standpoint is low base, high incentives. And that's something that was very muddled in that particular conversation. And that's just my particular standpoint. That's where I'm not going to be teetering on, where I do believe in working for what you earn. So that's just something I wanted to clear out in the air off of initiation. And any thoughts on that, Ben?
I think that for the most part, that's okay. As long as, I think for me, it's just, I think we're at a place in life where just with technology and like how little work is actually required for like the world to run and everybody have electricity in a house and to be able to eat, I think we should like be gearing towards people having as much as possible just taken off the table. So while I do think people should be able to like earn like, I guess, luxuries, I think that that's a more reasonable position in a country where like dental care isn't considered a luxury, and like saving money and like a vacation, like those things are all considered luxuries. So like if you consider those things essential, And then if people want like actual luxuries, like I guess like a Louis bag or something, then they have to work hard for it. I think that's reasonable. But I think expecting people to work extra hard so they can like live in a 3-bedroom house with their family and have a second car, I don't know how reasonable that is.
Um, it's going to sound very crazy. I don't. I want to. I'd love to choose my words wisely on how I present this, so it's not misconstrued. I believe a large necessity, majority of those things are luxuries. You know, a second car, a 3-bedroom home. Now, if you know your house requires you to have 3 bedrooms, if you have uh, if you have 3 kids, you know, you would need a 4-bedroom house, one bedroom for you, and then a bedroom for each of the kids as they grow older. I also believe that having a kid should be planned. Obviously, that doesn't always happen most of the time. However, that is you know a responsibility when you decide to have a child. Just like if you decide to have a car, have a house, it comes with responsibilities. I don't believe you should be having a kid unless you are able to provide for that kid adequately. Why bring a child into the world that you cannot provide for? That
Well,
is
unfortunately, that's more of a matter of public policy than a personal decision. Because in places where they just have universal birth control, they just have much lower rates of people having kids they can't afford because they would just choose to not have it instead.
which is understandable. However, there are other implications that go on that. It's something that was said before. However, it really sucks. But if you are not necessarily prepared, or at least taking the precautions to not have a child, then it is something that I cannot account for, or I don't think I should account for. Um, in terms of what goes on in my business or what I'm paying my employees. I understand that things do happen, but it is not, I don't feel at least my job to worry about the excess responsibilities that put on by that employee themselves. Um, Anything that you do is an action that you took. And so I am a firm believer in being responsible for your actions. So if you choose to have sex, understand that there are implications around that. There's a possibility of
But
having a
only to
child.
certain kinds of people. Some people can have sex and there aren't any consequences because they can afford for there not to be consequences because it's just who they were born related to. And other people can face extreme consequences for having sex. So like it's not really a matter of like choices when some people can make the same choice and there's no consequences and other people make the choice and there's extreme consequences.
Condoms are 98% effective. Condoms cost $1, $2 at the max. I am a
We
firm believer.
also don't like utilize public health education and even teaching people how to use condoms in our like sex education like programs in a lot of places.
However, there is a general consensus that if you don't want to have a kid, wear a condom. That's not a health crisis situation.
But
The knowledge of the condoms.
whose parents are teaching them how to put a condom on?
Just about almost. I can't. Obviously, there's no particular data on kids being taught to how to put on a condom, but there is the
Because I feel
understand.
like we are two people that were not taught by their parents how to put a condom on, unless I'm misreading.
No, I was taught by my parents how to put a condom on.
Oh, really? Then I guess it's just me. Then I guess it'd be 1 out of 2. I feel like that seems uncommon from people with a religious upbringing. Do you think that that's like normal, like common?
Um, Relatively, because I can't use my experiences as common because my experiences are very uncommon, especially considering that I'm black. Um, However, it is to my experience and degree very common that even in we'll call them religious households, that parents teach their children about sex ed, at least on a personal level. And the only reason I speak on that is because responsibility and accountability are huge, and so within a religious household now, as I said, this is very experience related. There's no data that can prove this or anything. Again, this is very in the field kind of thing. Um, Accountability is a very large part of what goes on, and so how accountable is the parent in that particular situation in preparing their children for life. And so one of the biggest things in religious households is, not having a kid. However, you also know that you're a parent to a child, and obviously they can sin. If your child can lie to you about grades, they can lie to you about sneaking out and going over to their girlfriend's house. I've been one of those kids to sneak out and lie about going to their girlfriend's house. However, there's the understanding of you are responsible for your actions. So something that has been drilled into my head since a child is you're my parents are not going to take responsibility or care of any children that come into the house. So they adequately prepared me for should something like that happen. Now, obviously it was encouraged, hey, don't do this. However, we are going to teach you that should this particular situation happen, these are the precautions to take. Um, Similar thing with driving. Like I said, there's no particular data on this. However, I like to think that all parents give their children at a certain age within the colored community the talk of what it means to make sure you have your walking papers. I don't know if they necessarily call them walking papers everywhere, but your walking papers are just making sure that you have proper identification and that you don't have anything on you when you're. Now, my parents aren't saying, they're obviously saying don't do drugs, don't do this, don't do that. However, in educating your children about things not to do, you also have to educate them should you be in this circumstance, because as a parent, I'm not always going to be with you. I can't make decisions for you. The only thing I can do, however, is prepare you for being in that situation. So yes, they prepare me for a situation of having sex. However, it's taught like, hey, don't do this. Feel me? So like I said, in experience, I would say that religious households do teach, their young how to put on a condom, because it's about accountability. Are you taking the necessary precautions for whatever it is? Are you taking necessary precautions? So like I said, I it's very experience related. However, in my experience, it is that people are taught how to put the condom on. Now, in this particular situation, I can also use myself. Um, you don't always use a condom, and you understand that at
Well, I think
least.
the gap in education, I think, is something that's more important, because would you say that somebody who did not receive that education and who did not have that experience where they were taught anything about sex whatsoever has the same level of responsibility as someone who was?
When it comes to sex education, I don't refer to sex education as a whole. I refer to, because we understand that condoms are 98% effective. There's
But
knowledge
if
of
you don't go
condoms.
to sexual education, you don't necessarily understand the seriousness or importance or all the data or all the things as to why. Like, like, all
Oh,
people say you should.
I didn't have a formal sex education.
No, I just mean, like, if you're never told anything about it, which is what abstinence only education is, you're just told nothing about anything, then, like, you literally know nothing about anything. And, like, even
but
like
there's still
condoms and stuff.
the it is common knowledge, to wrap it up. Like, that can even be down into a hood moniker, makes you wrap the Jimmy up. That is the idea of protection, at least on the condom level. At least on the condom level, is so widely known that doesn't require an education of sorts, but just
Right, but yet there's the condoms have existed for decades and decades and decades, and unplanned pregnancies still happen. So obviously, just the fact that condoms are available is not sufficient to be able to prevent unplanned pregnancies.
that's a people thing at that point.
It's not a people thing, it's a public health thing, because in places where they do comprehensive sex education and they offer like birth control to everyone, where everyone can afford it, they have much lower rates of unwanted pregnancy. Like, it's not a matter of individual choice, it's a matter of, if the government does things that make sense, then like the problem isn't a problem. Like, public health issues are a result of public policy. There's no individual causes for public health crises.
I am also a firm believer that any systematic issue is a system of people. Any systems are made up of moving parts.
But not the
Um,
same people. The people that run the system aren't the same people that are like crushed underneath the system, obviously.
Obviously, however, I am saying that in any system there is a group of working parts, whether it be the group of working parts opposing or a group of um, the parts crushing. There are still group of working parts, and when it comes to certain systematic issues, I believe it to be more of a failed individual basis, where if each of the individual parts did their job, then the entire system is fixed. Whereas someone coming in to fix the entire system, um, I don't believe that there's any one particular person or group or organization that will come in and fix the particular system. I believe that the solution is each individual person doing their job within that system to therefore make the change.
But not teaching people about sexual education so that they continue to have kids to like feed into bad schools, to feed into prisons, the military, and low paying jobs, like that's not a system that's broken. That's a system that functions exactly as it's supposed to like create people to graze on. So like you can't, like no individual person is going to do anything about that. Like there's no individual power that any person has to like stop the momentum of like this thing that's been happening since America pretty much existed.
They have the control of their own personal lives. I believe each person is going to control of their own actions and their own destiny. Um, how hard to try, and obviously there are forces that oppose everybody. However, each particular person, I believe, has their own responsibility to be accountable for themselves. And as if you're accountable for yourself, then each person is accountable for themselves, and therefore the system is then accountable for itself.
Well, what percentage of the direction of your life do you think is determined by the years from 0 to 18 of your life and the things that happen for you, to you, and about you, and with you, and all that?
A large factor. It's the core foundation of your years.
So if pretty much nobody has any control over anything that happens to them in their first 18 years of life, then how then can they be responsible for the results of that life? Because everyone's a child up like until 18 years old. You go where your parents tell you to, you learn the things they think are important, you listen to them, you like whatever things that they think are like good or bad, they teach you that. Whatever language they know, whatever religion they are, they teach you that. Like that's literally all you know is whatever somebody else, the best that they could do, whoever they happen to be. So if that's the case, how can you then be responsible for like the trajectory that those 18 years put you on?
The same way that you can hold someone that's racist accountable for being racist. They were born racist. That's what they were taught as right. Um, you the same way we would hold that particular person accountable for the change in mindset, their change in behavior, learning to be different. The same way that we would hold accountable someone that was abused and then just started to abuse someone else, and we want to get them help. The same way that we find, any particular person that's done wrong. Um, Due to childhood trauma or any of these particular natures, we don't expect that particular person to harp or have that carried with them throughout life. So the same way we'd expect any person to change their natural state of thinking, or even in this particular case, we can take me, someone that has been raised by two first generation wealth building families, both parents coming from absolutely nothing, doing that typical, oh, I had to walk this long for school and everything, to not necessarily being rich, but having a decent amount of wealth, especially compared to where they came from. That would mean that I am not able to change who I am and because of how I was raised and what I believe in my feelings towards other people. However, we expect someone like me to see the light, to come to a different understanding, which is the exact same standard that I hold to other people.
Right. Whereas racism or, you know, to me, sexism, homophobia, all that stuff. Those things are genuinely bad things that people are doing that they then have to unlearn and learn to not do, versus like having gone to bad schools and like having not had like the support at home to where you could succeed academically, and then like not really having a lot of career options. That's not you doing something bad. Like those are the effects of like the system just not providing for you in the way it's supposed to. Because like there's a whole lot of places where the kids just go to the public school, they get a decent education, and everything's fine. And in some places that just doesn't happen. And that's not the responsibility of any of the kids that are going there. And so we're talking about like generations and generations of people who like have not had equity in terms of their opportunity. So while it's like obviously everybody has some degree where like they can change like percentages and they can like do things and make stuff happen, in a competitive economy where only a certain amount of people can make a certain amount and you have to make a certain amount to live a decent quality of life, like setting a system up in such a way to where most of the people are not going to be able to have a position that's comfortable is just not ever going to make sense. And trying to like justify that by individual behavior is just like it's like insulting to like just reality and just common sense.
Well, it's also insulting to the people that were in those positions that did make it out, that were counted out, if you will, or per se, that went against literally all odds. So there's a great number of people that will just label them as people that just didn't give up or had that particular change.
Well,
And so,
logically, it's not that great of a number because we know it's only a very, very tiny percentage.
and yet it grows year over year. So it's obviously something that is going to take a large amount of time, but there is no, I don't believe in a systematic issue. Like as I said, I believe in a system being a coalition of working parts, and the answer to any systematic issue is each individual part doing their job in order to correct where they what they can.
But there's no process and there's no amount of time that can go by which every single person can be in the top 20% of earning in our society.
It's not
So if
about.
you have to be
I don't
so
believe
if
in
you
it
have
being
to
about
be
the
in the
top
top 20,
20%.
if you have to be in the top 20% of earning to be able to live a decent standard of life, which is the case in America, then you then have a country where 80% of your people are not living like a quality standard of life. And it's like whatever that percentage is legitimately like a public policy decision. Like you just decide what percentage of people are not going to make enough to be able to live a quality life. And so like in that system, like America, like we're doing, where we decide that the minimum wage is $7, which is something that's like less than a Chipotle burrito. Like you literally cannot work an hour of your life at minimum wage and then go buy a burrito. Like even if you're working at the place that sells the burrito. So like just the ways in which we have weighted things to where like people make such little money that so many people are just like paycheck to paycheck, don't have anything. You can't put like 50, 70 million people being in low wage jobs on just like, well, I guess all 70 million of those people individually, if they were to tell me their life story, I would find something that I could critique.
What's going on, Ramblers? I don't mean to interrupt today's podcast, but we have a quick mid roll from our sponsors.
And judge, and then I would be able to justify the fact that they actually don't deserve to have a 2-bedroom apartment and a car that works.
I don't necessarily believe it's something that's deserved. As I said, it's earned. I believe you get what you work for. There are a lot of people in that, we'll call them the 70 million people, that I'm not going to say that you can find something wrong or why they deserve to be in the situation that they be in or that they're in. But I do believe that your actions in the past dictate the results in the future.
Then that would mean that you'd be able to critique and find some place in their life where it's actually their fault. All 70 million of those people, you would be able to go one by one and critique every aspect of their life and find the ways where they actually didn't measure up. And really, it's not the fault of like companies that don't pay enough or bad school districts or redlining or a prison industrial complex or any other of the systemic factors, but it's actually all 70 million individual of those people making mistakes that are causing their situation all collectively at the same time, but individually.
No, I don't necessarily believe it would be all 70 million people, as I said.
But it would have to be, though, to justify how 70 million people are working in these kinds of low wage bad jobs. Like they would have to all it would have to be all of their fault for them to be working in those jobs, because you're saying it's up to your personal decisions. So that means all 70 million of those people must have made personal decisions that led them there.
No, because I believe that in those 70 million, there are people in there that one that have plans that are there on purpose that are like, hey, I'm using this to move up, and that they're only, or they might be doing it as a second side job. I do believe that a majority of those 70 million people have taken a course of action that is the reason why you are there, because there's no anything that anywhere you are at is a result because of what you've done. So
But
if you're
determined that what happens from 0 to 18 is like a lot of what happens in your life. So how can that then be the case?
Because we can't excuse the fact of people being 0 to 18 and then saying, well, because of what happened between the ages of 0 and 18, that excuses your thinking and how you're supposed to perform as an adult.
But we just established that the majority of what happens in your adult life was determined by 0 to 18.
Because of the decisions you make.
No, but you're not in control of your life from 0 to 18. You're living under your parents, or you're living as a ward of the state, or you're whatever you're doing. You're not a person who's in control of your life from 0 to 18, like definitively.
You have relative control over your life at young ages.
Do you get to pick where you go to school?
To a degree.
How? How would you get to pick where you go to school if your parents want you to go somewhere?
You would say, hey, if you're that's different. If your parents, like I said, to a degree.
But you have no legal right to be able to tell your parents anything as a child.
No.
So therefore, you can't say, well, you should do this because they have no right to do that. They might not be able to.
So you're saying that anyone between the ages of 0 to 18, that whatever happened to you, so because that happened, that is an excuse for your actions as an adult. So,
well, I mean, does what happens to you between 0 to 18 determine the course of your life or not? Does it or not? If it does, which is common sense that it does, then obviously it has a big effect on it. And you can't say it's just the person's choices.
So by definition, my 0 to 18, I've experienced two people, birthed by two people that started with absolutely nothing, all odds stacked against them, poor communities, single parent households, abusive parents, seen abusive relationships in their own personal household, walk to school, two bad school systems. New Haven, especially during the 80s and 90s and 70s, 80s and 90s, was an atrocious school system. My father's mom, my grandmother, single mother, raised 5 kids on her own.
I mean, this is really great for them.
Worked backbreaking jobs to put them through school. My mother was raised on a farm for a good portion. Both people said, I'm not going, through those, resounding factors, and not to mention the fact that they're also both Black, then raised a child, me, to understand that I am 100% accountable for my actions and that everyone is where they are because of those actions.
Right, so but that's just like objectively inaccurate, though. It's not about, like, I understand.
That would be based on the experiences of my 0 to 18. That would be untrue. It would be 100% accurate.
No, it's not accurate just because you're around two people that were able to overcome something that in no way makes any statement against the systemic factors.
Every single person on my dad's side
to jump in class. Class is a numbers game. It's a pyramid. There are fewer people the higher you get up in there. So by definition, everybody cannot get richer all at the same time. So some people are going to be at the top. Some people are going to be at the bottom.
Everyone can get richer at the same time. It just matters. You're not going to get as rich as other people. But I'm just asking you,
if the bottom 40% aren't going to be able to afford a quality standard of life, which was like the case, then you can't say that, like, oh, well, I guess it's like the fault of all the people who are in the bottom 40%. no, it's the fault of the system that says the bottom 40% can't afford to live. Like, it's the system. It's
No, so
obviously not individual people,
you fail to answer the question. Based
which
on
is what?
your logic, is the core years of someone's life 0 to 18 determine the trajectory, regardless of whatever else happens, of a person's life. That's what you said.
Right, which is why you're an adult and you think the thing that you were taught from 0 to 18. That's what I'm talking about. The trajectory of life is determined by the things that happen.
So, because of that, I do not have to be accountable or responsible in that thinking. It is okay because between the ages of 0 to 18, that's how I was raised and that was my experience. That if you work hard enough, bootstrap and pull yourself up, even if you are in an abusive household situation where where you have a single parent living below the poverty line, where you have five brothers sharing one single bed, true story, five brothers sharing one single bed, to being in the, we're not going to call it top 20%, but in making a livable wealthy wage and being able to pass on wealth. So going from that to nothing, and then each of the brothers doing that. So in my personal experience and what I've seen, and understanding that the people in my immediate in my surroundings that aren't making it are very much not trying, and understanding the lessons that I was taught in, okay, hey, when you're in high school, it starts then. Are you going to parties, or are you doing your schoolwork? Are you
But there's plenty of people who
are
go to
you
parties instead
skipping?
of doing their schoolwork and they have rich parents and there's no consequences.
Those people aren't you. I was also taught, why are you focusing? That is not your situation. Focus on people are always
All
worried
right, but
about
you're judging
other
their
people's.
situation, so they're allowed to care about other people's situations.
I'm not judging anyone else's
You
situation.
are judging people's situations by saying that it's their fault that they weren't able to achieve something that's statistically only going to happen to a very small number of people.
No, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. That's where what I tried to say gets misconstrued. What I'm asking you is, based on what you said, and that your core years of 0 to 18 that determine your trajectory are excusable for your actions as an adult. So I'm
Right.
asking you, based on that same theory, my actions, my thoughts, my beliefs, based on experiences between the ages of 0 to 18, are that if you bootstrap, you pull yourself up. If you don't focus on what someone else has and focus on yourself, anybody can make it. Literally anybody. You just have to work hard enough and smart enough.
Right. Which is like, I'm going to compare it to, like, for example, I was raised to think that like people being gay was a sin, which, like, now as like the person that I am now, I now consider to be a morally reprehensible like statement and opinion because of just the interactions that I've had with people and how it affects them to have who they are just like slandered and denounced in that way. So like I was still responsible when I used to believe that way and when I used to hurt people based on those beliefs. And I feel the same way that these beliefs, like, of thinking that despite like just all the obvious evidence to the contrary, like to appease your own sense of guilt so that you don't have to feel as much empathy to decide that people are responsible for their own like situations, despite the fact that that's just obviously not true by common sense. Like I find that to be a morally reprehensible position also. But like
So
because you were
so you
but
said
listen,
you
listen,
don't feel
wait,
people are
hold on,
responsible for for their life
hold on.
positions?
What I'm saying is, so whereas like I can excuse the fact that you feel that way because of the fact that you were taught that. And I can
And
understand that
because of
like
the
if you were taught
experiences.
that, you're going to think that that's normal if that's what you're taught. And everything that's taught to you is going to be framed from that perspective. All the examples that you're given are going to be framed from that perspective. And they're only going to focus on the things that validate that and make that seem true. So it's understandable to believe in that until you get approached with all the other information. And once you get approached with the other information and you continue to reject it and stick with like the morally reprehensible position, that's like when it transitions towards like bad actions on you as something that you're doing.
Okay, so what I will do is present you with facts on why it is everyone's fault.
There won't be any because there aren't any.
That is for me to find.
Like you can find like some Heritage Foundation nonsense where it's like people that make $1 billion that want to explain to you how like, oh, I know that I make $1 billion off of people that make $8 an hour, but actually it's their fault that they make $8 an hour and not me having $1 billion. That's actually not the reason.
I don't understand that example.
I mean, like we talk about like what you invest your money in and like how much you want your profits to be, how much you spend on labor. Money that you do not spend on labor goes in your pocket. So the money that you do not like pay to your employees is like extra profits for you. So if you have the ability to decide like, oh, well, the economy is such that people have no choice but to take $10 an hour. So I'm only going to pay $10 an hour. I'm just going to keep the rest. Like that's the reason that people are only making $10 an hour. Yet, like to them, so that number one, to appease their own guilt, they don't have to feel empathy, and number two, so that people don't like start to blame them and actually try to do something about it. They instead have to create a narrative that it's actually all those individual millions of people that are actually messing up and forcing me to only pay them $10 an hour. Not that I'm greedy and I just want all this money, so I only pay them $10 an hour.
I will present you with facts on why it is those people's fault. That's all I can do in that particular situation. Because as I said, and I stand on, there's the only way to fix a systematic problem is to fix the individual parts working within that particular system so that they are all working on the same page.
But they're objectively have different goals, so they can't be on the same page. Because the system wants people to be poor and people don't want to be poor. So you can't work together with that.
So the system that is broken in terms of what we're focusing on, Black people, not just, or even poor people as a whole, would then have to focus on coming together to change the system.
But so, there's no focus that we can do to change a system that is financially entrenched by billions and trillions of dollars and owns the media and owns politicians. Like that's an entire revolution of the entire country. So like that's just something that like to justify doing that, you would have to understand that these are systemic issues and systemic problems that would require overturning and having a revolution of the entire country, including the economic and financial sector.
I will show data that I disagree.
Because like capitalism is just such that it creates castes and it creates like some people are going to make a lot and a lot of people are not going to make very much. And like in a situation where unions are a counterbalancing force against like the owner class, then there's a lot more like sharing in terms of like wealth. People get paid more, there's better conditions. But like when you're in a country where like unions have been systematically beaten down, as in America, to where everybody's just trying to negotiate against a country that can hire 1,000 people in your same position tomorrow, like you can't expect people to have any ability to negotiate for themselves or to be able to create situations for themselves that don't already exist.
Yeah, as I said, all I can do is present data on why I feel that the actions that the people take are the reason that they're in the position that they're in.
But you do recognize that
there are larger systematic issues at force and play.
Well, no, this was
that
something
come into those actions. Yes,
this was something else. Like you realize that you weren't shown data that this was true ever. Like you've only ever just been told this, and you've been given anecdotal examples that were like said to support this. So it's like, oh, this person that's poor, like, no, they didn't have dyslexia. No, they don't have mental issues that they weren't able to get together. It's actually because like of their just inability to work hard. Like that's something that somebody who has a specific worldview that says that people who have less than them actually like are people that aren't worth feeling empathy for And like, that's just how they justify it in their own mind. So like, I just want you to understand that like, you can't be
No, I've been no.
like you
My
can't be
dad's a strict.
reasoned out.
No, my dad is a strict statistical person. I presented with data facts. I'm my dad hates. I feel, but I feel. He's a
But
very
he's based his entire
data
life off of an I feel statement.
No, from data. He's a large research person. I can have you. I can actually introduce. I'm sure you don't. No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. That's he will drive you crazy. But there is definitely loads of research on why the actions of people point them into the directions in which they are.
Right, but I mean, like, just income, like the income of neighborhoods affects the infant mortality rate, affects the literacy rate, it affects the rates of like childhood asthma, it affects like like rates of child abuse, it affects rates like physical abuse in general, it affects rates of violence. Like literally, like how much money your family makes is correlated to pretty much every single thing that happens in your entire life. So like you can understand how then I would be skeptical that there could possibly be any data that would then suggest that despite all of those things being determined by income, which as a child is not up to you, somehow the determinative factor is actually individual behavior. Like, do you see how like knowing those things that's like impossible?
What do you mean?
Like, do you see how like if literally every single aspect of your life, from education to health to like mental stuff to like what quality of like everything you have, if everything in your life is determined by income, like in terms of like correlation, then like how can you then say like that somehow the determinative factor is actually individual behavior? Like, can you see how if you know that everything is determined by how much your parents make in your early life, it could then be impossible to conclude that people like are somehow determinative in terms of like which like overall direction their life takes?
I can see, but again, that would be negating that each person is not accountable or responsible for their life. That
Right, because it needs to negate it, because that's preposterous, because we know that like how much money your parents make determines the overall course of your life to a significant degree. So therefore we would then know that it's not possible that people's individual decisions would be the major determinative factor.
everyone reacts to different points differently. If that was the case, then people with money would always fare better, which isn't always the case.
They almost always do. Like 99.9% of the time they do. Like people with more money are happier. People with more money live longer. People with more money have better relationships. Like literally everything associated with your quality of life is correlated with like how much money you have up to a certain point. And like to a certain point, more money doesn't make you happier. But if you're below that point, you are statistically not as happy as somebody who is at that point or above.
Then I will provide you with data that contracts the facts or contracts those particular facts that you're presenting, because there is data that is on the opposite.
Well, I already presented the facts that were on the opposite. The opposite end of the facts are that at a certain point, more money doesn't make you happier. And so like the fact that money doesn't buy happiness is true if you have a certain base amount of things in your life to where you have a certain amount of comfortability and flexibility and security. But like if you are below the ability of having comfortability and stability and security, you are just functionally just not as happy as someone who is. And it's just like, how could you be? How could somebody who's worrying about paying the rent every month be as happy as somebody who isn't? You just can't be.
I see what you're saying, and I will get back to you on that point.
Yeah, I actually like did see some interesting data on that point, like actually today, because like the original thing that I was talking about where it says like the number was like about $75,000. So like up to about $75,000 a year. Like they like took a survey of like individual people over like decades. And as these people made more or less money, they like checked in with them about like how happy and overall like how things were, how they felt, how stressed they were, all that kind of stuff. And so by mapping how happy people were, like people overwhelmingly became happier as they started to make more and more money up to about $75,000. And then it like started to level off. And it was pretty much like the same because like once you have everything you need, like more stuff just isn't going to make you happier. But this new study that actually came out, like even like more so like cemented the fact that like below that standard where like you have everything you need, there's like definitive correlation between how happy you are and how much money you make. And I can say this as a, like in my personal life, I became exponentially much happier the times where I've gotten like more money around me.
I think what that leads to is a segue into what we'll be talking about in the next podcast. How something that we've slightly touched on in this particular podcast, but we'll be discussing in the next one is how wealth, first generation wealth, affects families, especially within urban communities. Which is a part two of what we're talking about today, primarily because as there being effects of first generation immigrants and first generation college students, first generation anything, there are effects on that. So and I'll have much more data to give you based on what I believe in terms of the core data, in that each person is responsible for their actions, and that basically you're saying people cannot choose their life course. They can't choose, they have no control over what happens in their life, is what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying they have no control. What I'm saying is that the systemic factors around them have a whole lot more control than people do individually, such that it stacks the odds against certain people in a different place than it stacks the odds against another person. Like if you're in a place where the odds of like going to college, getting a decent job and having a good quality of life are about 50%, and you grow up in this place where like the odds of that are about 1% based on just like the number of people that go through there, the person who's like facing the 1% odds does not have the same set of options and choices, and is not having the same experience as the person who's in a place where it's 50-50. And so to then put these two people next to each other and say, yep, the only difference between these people is how hard they worked, and the person that's poor, they just must not have worked as hard, like that's preposterous.
So how do you explain two people in the same situation against the 1%?
Some people can be better than other people, and it's okay for other people to be better than you. That doesn't mean you deserve to be poor. Like you don't have to be the best at something to deserve to not to be poor. Like it's ridiculous that you have to be like top of the class, or you have to be special. Like, oh, well, like, are you taking extra classes? Are you doing this? Are you doing this onerous thing that people with more resources than you don't have to do? Like, yeah, obviously as a matter of personal advice, you should tell people to do everything that they can. But to sit back and like say that like anybody who's not overcoming insane odds and really difficult circumstances that other people do not have to do just isn't motivated enough, like that's ridiculous. And like it's only something that you can say from a position of privilege and not having to like be in that same position these people are in right now.
I feel like if you don't exhaust each one of your avenues of resources, then you didn't give the proper amount of effort. Only when someone has exhausted every single avenue of available resources, whatever they might be, no matter how crappy, terrible, whatever those resources might be, if a person doesn't at least go and utilize each resource, then I can't give you a pass for the system affecting you. Because if you didn't,
well, why
if
are
you
you
didn't
passing
utilize,
judgment? Like
if
you don't
didn't
have to
utilize,
give somebody a pass if you're not judging them for no reason based on assuming that they're doing something wrong, instead of somebody with way more power is doing things wrong to them.
Because we know that people in power are doing things wrong.
Right. So then to blame the people who are having things done to them for the people doing things wrong to them, you can understand how that's gaslighting, and that's really bad thing to do.
Well, you can also understand that when people understand that something is going on and yet don't change course, that is the exact same thing as what's the word? Insanity.
Okay, but like
going to do something over and over again that you know won't work.
right,
If
but what if you only have a certain amount of options for things you can do? Like literally, like just talking about people that are felons, like in terms of even trying to get an education, get housing, get a job, get anything like that, like there's like millions of people that are disenfranchised like in this country and have no ability to really do any of the things that you would tell them to do.
That group of disenfranchised is a lot smaller than you think.
I mean, we have like a sixth of the entire world's prison population. Like we have more people in prison in America than China.
Yes.
So it's a massive amount of people. I think it might be somewhere close to like 1% of all the Americans are in prison. Like, and that's not even like getting into like people in the like immigrant community that are caught up in law enforcement. I don't know. Like I guess my point is
0.7% of the population.
So that's what, like 2 million?
I'm just gonna type in 357 million divided by. Oh no, 350. My phone. Let's find out. Roughly 2.5 million. Using the 357 million people. I'm assuming that's how many people are in America, I think. But 0.7% of that is 2.5 million. 2.499 on the dot. Like 300.7% of 357 million is exactly 2,499,000 on the dot.
It's a whole lot of people. Some like half of them for like marijuana.
Now, I would like to also speak on that because I do smoke. I also believe that we need to do a much better job and it's like I understand that we are being targeted. We've had the talk. However, the point of having that talk is to know what to do, what to avoid. We understand that the police are targeting us, and I feel that a large number of us make that target bigger.
But you see how the argument always circles back to the people that are having things done to them, it actually being their fault and not the people doing things to them?
I'm not blaming anyone in this situation. If anything,
but that's what it is.
Obviously the police would be blaming for targeting. However, what I'm saying is let's not add insult to injury.
But that's blaming. That's what that is. Like you're allowed to, but like you're not allowed to not have it characterized as blaming if you're saying, well, although I acknowledge that this is happening, it is also relevant to note
that these people are doing this, which like there's no reason to bring it up besides blaming. It's bringing up
No,
black
that's
on black crime in response to Black Lives Matter.
No, that's something that's not at all how that would that go. It's literally a noteworthy point. It's not a
It's a
blame.
noteworthy point that black people kill more black people than police kill black people.
I do think that is a noteworthy point.
Whew.
I also think that we should stop killing other black people.
Right, but is that an adequate thing to bring up in response to like people saying the police need to stop killing us?
No.
So then, how is it an adequate thing to bring up?
And I only just
started.
started thinking that.
What do you mean?
That it's something that shouldn't be brought up. When people would bring up I am a black on black crime bringer upper.
Oof.
Because I feel like everything starts with self. I am a firm believer that everything starts with self.
But like crime is a matter of proximity, and we live in a segregated country. So just like white people kill mostly white people, black people kill mostly black people.
Why?
Because we live in a segregated country, and people kill the people that they're close to. So if you're black, the people that you're close to are black. If you're white, the people you're close to are white.
But why, as a black person, do we have to kill another black person? What is the point of killing that person? Why are you killing a person?
The same reason that white people kill other white people, because they are close to them. If you're close to other white people, you will kill white people most likely. If you're mostly close to black people, then you are mostly likely to be a kill a black person. Like it's just averages, just percentages.
Hey Ramblers, before you go, make sure you're following us on social media at Assistance HQ across the board for all content and exclusives. And for an even more personal touch, subscribe to our weekly newsletter with the link in the description.